We're not out there fighting anything other than crime.
We see stuff that nobody should have to see.
Put your hands back! Hands it back! Hands it back! Go!
Get out of it, Mel. Get out of it! Get out of it!
Don't move! Don't move!
George 31, erect out.
Don't go! Don't go! Don't go!
Put it in paper. You're going to jail. Where else do you think you're going?
You're listening to The Beat, profiles of police nationwide. So tonight's two guests, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mike the New Haven podcast, episode 324, on this very nice Friday night, at least in this side of this country. I don't know where the weather is where you may be, but I hope it's just as lovely as it is here. These two guests are returning guests and have been longtime supporters of the show. I'll introduce them in a moment. And what's funny is when I had them on, The Beat wasn't a miniseries yet. So you can kind of say they were the precursors to the miniseries itself, which is now tonight with this show at its 12th volume. So it's nice to have them back. And I've been meaning to get them back to revisit a certain case. And we're going to do that tonight with this particular case, which I'll discuss in depth with them in a moment. But just wanted to say welcome to everyone. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was with Joe Bonanno, not the mobster, the good Joe Bonanno, as I joked, who was a retired New York City firefighter. He did 22 years with the FDNY from 79 to 01. His father was on the job. His late brother was on the job. And he talked about a lot of the things he did in his career, worked during some very chaotic times for the city and a lot of busy firehouses. So that was a really, really fun show. Talked a little bit about mental health, unfortunately, and that's important this month. It is Mental Health Awareness Month, unfortunately, as he discussed his brother. He lost his brother to suicide. So he opened up on that. And it's important, especially for first responders, to be open about that. So covered a lot of ground, and I really enjoyed him. What a great guest he was. Hello to everyone in the chat tonight, rather if you're watching via Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Joe Maliga, John Costello, retired NYPD detective first grade, Bill Ryan, Dawn Marie, and Jerome Barbario, all here. Great to see you. We're going to go through a couple ads real quick because I don't want to keep my guest waiting too long. And the first one, of course, as you know by now, is my consulting company. Need advice on how to start your podcast? Frustrated with the editing process? Can't find a voiceover guy? Hi, I'm Mike Colón, and I'm here to help. I'm the owner and founder of MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company for all things media, where I can offer you consulting advice on how to get started, and once you get started, editing, as well as voiceover work, all for a very reasonable price. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at 917-781-6189 or the email that you see listed here. I'm always available, and I'm always willing to help. Again, 917-781-6189. Why go to some giant consulting firm that's going to charge you an arm and a leg when you can just come to me? If you want to be stress-free, the way to go is to call MC. MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company. And much like both of my guests, who I'll introduce in a moment, this guy right here is a guy that's going to keep working. He'll be 100 years old and still doing some sort of investigative work. He may be retired from the NYPD, but he's not retired from investigations, and that is Mr. Billy Ryan. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast. And just briefly before I begin, shout out to my New York Rangers who are now in the conference finals. They took 35 years off my life in the process, but they made it to the next round. And of course, the Knicks are in action tonight, who will take another 35 years off my life. So let's hope that they can get the job done. And of course, like I said, I wanted to get these next two guests back on the program. Both have been on for separate episodes of their own. Tonight, they're together for this volume 12 of The Beat. And it's covering an interesting time in really the work that U.S. Customs, back when it was separate from Border Protection, they've since merged, that occurred back in 2003, was doing. So you look at the 80s as the cocaine cowboys era. A lot was happening back then in terms of the transport of drugs, particularly down in Florida. Think of it as the Miami Vice era. Even at the beginning of the 90s, however, this was something that was still going on. And this case was at the dawn of that particular decade, 90 into 91, an intensive operation that stretched from Miami, Florida, which was kind of the U.S. capital, unfortunately, the drug trade back then, to Bogota, Colombia. So when you think of all these movies that have had that sort of subject matter to it, or television shows, this is what it's based off of. This is the real thing. And this exact operation was Operation Overlord. And joining me tonight as they return to the Mike the New Haven podcast are two of the men who were heavily involved in that investigation and its outcome. As we dive into this case tonight, we're retired special agents Alex Alonso and Miles Sonn. Guys, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Mike. If I may, Mike, real quickly, on behalf of Memorial Day coming up next week, I would like to just give a shout out to a colleague and current special agent who I work with, John Logis, at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. John is a retired detective from Fort Lauderdale Police Department. He was a task force officer for DEA for many, many years, working overdose deaths. John is a true American hero. His father was killed in Vietnam on September 6, 1969. John was 6 months old. And the Logis family, I just want to salute them for producing John, the son, who is a phenomenal investigator, a police officer. He's currently in the U.S. Army Reserves. He's an E8 with the CID, and he just is becoming promoted to Sergeant Major and will be attending the Sergeant Major Academy in July. And with that, my son-in-law also is in the Army active, and he just got selected for Sergeant Major, and they're actually in the same class. They haven't met, and they're going to meet over the summer. It's a pretty amazing feat that the two of them, two guys that I really admire and appreciate what they've done for this great country, will be in the same class for a year at Fort Bliss in El Paso. So I just wanted to again thank the Logis family for the heroics of John Earl Logis, who was killed in action in Vietnam in 1969, and that, John, my former partner here at FDLE, is a true American hero. So I just wanted to pass that on.
Oh, no problem. I appreciate you mentioning that shout out, and to those guys, stay safe and be well for sure. So this operation, as I mentioned in the introduction, really started in 90. And it's back then, as we talked about in your respective solo episodes, there was so much to keep track of back then because you had so many different players, some at the middleweight level, some minor league guys, some major heavyweight dealers that, they make movies and documentaries about that were involved. But this particular operation, I guess, Alex, we'll start with you. How did it come to be? What's prompted your involvement?
So we started seeing, like, we were both coming out of different investigative groups. I was in the Marine unit. Miles had been too. We had talked about what we would do with investigations. we were understanding and noticing that there were all this activity around the seaport and the airport, and we had a lot of confidential informants that were coming to us with all this information. And so we would always talk about, man, wouldn't it be great, Miles, to start an undercover operation? I had a background in import and export, and I knew that business. And I always wanted to do that, right? To set up like a company where we could, move shipments back and forth. And Miles knew the other business side of it. So we always talked about it. So we thought, hey, let's try to do it. And we got an opportunity in the 90s.
That was really, and I'm glad you mentioned that was where the connection was. The airports, seaports in particular, were a haven for this. Anywhere you went, any major city, it seemed, and Miami, Florida was no different.
Exactly. We would continue. The different cases we were working, we were both assigned to an intelligence gathering group when we first started. And we would get called. We'd work a lot with the customs inspectors. They'd call us out. There was a duty team that was assigned to the South Florida task force at the time, and they wouldn't do anything if it was below 5 kilos of cocaine. Imagine that, Mike. 5 kilos of cocaine was nothing in Miami, and so we were like, all right, forget it. Let's leave it up to the intel guys. So we would show up, we'd get the intel from that seizure, and then follow it up. And so we were seeing a lot of these types of cases, and realized we could put something together.
And that brings me to you, Miles. Your involvement, as Alex mentioned, you're coming out of separate investigations of your own. You know how well Alex works. Alex knows how well you work. So as far as a situation like this where you have 8 kilos, at least the start of it, tell me about how you personally became involved in this case.
So with myself, I would say to Alex, I said, listen, we would respond to anything 24/7, where the other groups would not, we were an intelligence group. Our group was really just to gather intelligence and pass it on to other groups. But the groups that would not do anything with it, we would go out and try to make a case to the point where the inspectors at the seaport and the airport realized that they can count on Miles and Alex any day, any time of the night, 7 days a week, to come out and try to put the pieces of the puzzle together, to the point where they would call us on a regular basis, that they had, the inspectors at the airport knew every nuance with regard to every airline coming in from South America. The inspectors at the seaport knew every containerized shipping company who were coming from all parts of South America. They knew what, when, and where merchandise was coming in. They would provide us with previous seizure documents showing, okay, if something came in plantains, something came in asphalt, flowers, we would be the guys that would run with it, look into it more deeply. Alex had the knowledge of going to customs house brokers, finding who the consignees of those past shipments were, and then we would start investigating from going back in time to forward, and being able to then make an assumption, okay, the next load shipment of flowers, the next shipment of asphalt from this, from Venezuela could contain narcotics, and we would pass that on to the inspectors, and they wholeheartedly were engaged with us to the point where they would rip a 40-foot container apart and look for anything that we suggested would be in there. And for the most part, we were spot on. They would find it. They felt they were rewarded for their hard work, and then we would take it, run with it, try to make a control delivery, make a case.
We have the PDF that you sent, and I thank you for that. That will guide us through tonight. My normal outline, which again, this has all the details here. There was no reason for an outline. And I'll cite from one paragraph in particular, then I'll throw it back to you, Alex. The special operation, Operation Overlord, and I quote, will continue the airport-seaport connection concept initiated in the current investigation, and it's expected to continue for an undetermined length of time. Other smuggling organizations have already been identified that are interested in smuggling narcotics into South Florida. The Augusto Ramirez organization, the Andres Alzate organization, and the Edgar Salazar organization, and the Mauricio Sandoval organization. So naturally, when we're thinking, I mean, at least people, and again, this is because of TV and media, you're thinking drug lord, you're thinking Pablo Escobar. Obviously, there's other organizations involved at the time, headed by different individuals. So just a brief rundown on each four guys and the kind of repertoire they had and what they were working with. Alex, who were these individuals exactly?
So Mike, and I see the point, right? So everybody wanted Pablo Escobar, right? Everybody wanted, the main high level drug. But to get to those guys, it was unless you were directly connected or you had, had some involvement, and there was a lot of different investigations, a lot of different agencies trying to work these high level drug kingpins. What Miles and I decided to do, and basically just out of, we were able to recruit a couple of excellent informants that would provide us with information. We were able to go through the steps and set up this undercover business. We had a business that, like Miles said, it was a warehouse. We had actual individuals making phone calls. We had trucks coming in and out, cargo coming in and out. It was as legitimate as it could be. We went through the steps of getting our legitimate custom house broker licenses, and so that if anybody checked us out, they would say, no, this is a legitimate cargo company. And that's what we would do. So these individuals that you just named off were individuals that sort of fell into the spider web, right? That's how, if we want to put it that way, right? So we put it out there that we had this ability, the ability to transport your goods in a container, in suitcases. We had contacts at the airport. So when we first, early on, I had gone to our assistant special agent in charge with a proposal. I had read Joe Pistone's, who I think you've had on your podcast as well. Joe Pistone's very famous for his work in infiltrating the mob. I had read his book on what he did. And to me, that was like what I wanted to aspire to. Like, wow, imagine getting into that type of undercover operation where we could really infiltrate a group. And I knew that we had this problem at the Miami airport among the ramp workers. So I went with this proposal to our ASAC at the time, our assistant special agent in charge, and he's like, no, we don't do that. We don't put our people in that long-term undercover. So I was disappointed, but Miles came up with the idea of, hey, what if we do it like this? We do a warehouse, we identify. And that's what we did, Mike. We set up this warehouse. We set up the trappings, I guess you could say, all the way, right? We had the systems, we had the receptionist, we had real office, we had real work, real trucks coming in and out. And then as we spread the word, hey, this is what we do. And that's how these individuals started falling into. Some guy would come and say, hey, listen, I have a shipment. Can you do that for us? Absolutely. We'd set up the meetings. Sometimes they were at the warehouse. Other times they were in different areas.
And part of what Alex was explaining, what made the warehouse and the business absolutely viable was the fact that we were able to, at that time, get our operation Overlord certified by Maine Treasury, which allowed us to use move money, and any violation that would be a criminal violation for an average citizen or person, money remittance, moving of money, we were exempt. So what would happen if we were getting paid or if we were making a delivery, got proceeds, part of our operation, because the business is legitimate, we work very closely with DEA in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, as well as Bogota. Bogota DEA basically thought the world of us. And what we would do, we were allowed to send proceeds back to Colombia, where we would send it back to the recipient. DEA would go up on a wire and start tracking the individuals in Colombia with the Colombian National Police and identifying and picking individuals who were responsible for sending the shipment. And it was all predicated on the fact that we were certified. We actually were the second certified operation in the U.S. government. So we were fortunate because the FBI, DEA, nobody had those certifications, and they would all come to us. And they knew, because of his experience, my experience, that they knew they could trust us. We weren't going to, quote, steal cases. There was no backstabbing. And we had this marriage that was truly made in heaven with all the other agencies.
We learned quickly, Mike, from our mistakes. When we were first starting this operation up, we got funds and got all what we needed to fill up with desks and space in the warehouse and all that. One of the things we did was we took some vehicles out of vehicles that had been auctioned or were up for auction from seizures, from previous seizures, and we had this one particular vehicle in the warehouse. And I remember in one particular case where we had brought in a shipment of cocaine. We had arranged it. We took it off the airport. I think it was a 10-kilo case. It was one of our first cases. And the idea was to have the individual come into the warehouse. We negotiate. He would pay us the fee for, at the time, it was like $4,000 a kilo. We would charge to bring in this stuff from Colombia. And then he would drive it off. And I remember him showing up at the warehouse. All our perimeter team was ready and everything was good to go. And he walks in, and it was myself doing the undercover with a female informant. And we took him into the warehouse to show him, hey, this is, he was impressed with the business. He was like, whoa, this is really nice, guys. And I could see him thinking, all right, we're going to do more business. But I walked him into the warehouse, and all of a sudden he froze up. Something was not right. I could tell. And he was already like something was happening. He goes, hey, I know this Jeep. And I'm thinking, oh no, where was this Jeep? And he says, hey, yeah, this Jeep is just like my friend's Jeep. I go, yeah, we have a guy who goes out and buys cars for us. I think he even bought it at an auction. It's what I said, because I'm thinking, oh no, if he knows this Jeep, it's because this Jeep was seized from someone that was, transporting cocaine. And anyways, when we went back inside, we're sitting down, and he's still not 100% convinced, but he hands over the money with, I forgot what it was, 200,000 or whatever it was. And we're kind of briefly counting, but that's it. I put it away. And all of a sudden, Miles forgot that it was time, and he got caught upstairs, and he thought this guy was going to come up and see him. So Miles comes walking down the stairs, right, of our business. And the guy just froze in his tracks, and he's looking at Miles. And if you've seen Miles looks like a state trooper. Back then he was really buff working out, and the guy just, you can tell, it's like, this is blown. And Miles comes down the stairs and starts yelling at us about some container at the port. You remember this, Miles? Some container at the port that had been stuck. So the pretending he was one of the partners in the company, and he walks out, and the guy, he looks at me, he looks at the informant, and he says, "Do you think I can get that bag of money again?"
He wanted his money back.
I gotta go do something beforehand. I was like, no, you gotta go now. You gotta take the Jeep. He goes, no, I think I'm gonna call somebody, man. He ran out of there, and we're like, damn it, and we missed him. So later on he sent somebody, and we ended up getting arrested. But we had been learning, like, okay, note to self: don't take any more cars out of auction.
And note to self was like, the individual, the target showed up early, and I was still in literally the office of the undercover business, and I was get ready to leave and be a surveillance, but I got caught inside because he showed up early, and I had to figure out a way to make it appear that I was not a cop, and I just started going off on Alex and the female informant as if they didn't perform one of my orders, and and I went nuts, and I thought that would be a good cover, but the target still wasn't buying it. He still wasn't buying it.
He didn't buy that one.
Yeah.
That's how you learn. I mean, you learn on the fly. You jog the story before we continue with this investigation. This is volume 12 of the Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. We're revisiting Operation Overlord. And for those of you tuning in just now, our guests tonight are retired special agents of U.S. Customs, Miles Sonn and Alex Alonso. This is an NYPD story where, same thing, they were doing an undercover operation to stifle some drug dealers. There might have been gun runners, one of the two. There's a guy, undercover cop, in the back seat. Now they pull up behind and marked vehicles to pull him over, and he's freezing because he wanted to give the illusion that he wasn't a cop. So he realized he misstepped, and this was dangerous, but it worked out. He took out his gun on these two guys. He's like, "You set me up. You guys are cops. You set me up." And they're like, "No, give us another chance." But point being, it's the stuff you come up with on the fly that can really enhance later investigations, as you guys put it perfectly. Learn from your mistakes. Producer Vick in the back asked a great couple of questions that I wanted to highlight before we continue about this. With this particular business that you guys set up, did it have one location or multiple? And you kind of answered it, but I'll still ask it anyway. If you guys had caught people previously, how did you avoid word spreading out about the business from guys who maybe have been caught?
Well, that's a good question. So we had this primary location. This was for our cargo business and for the stuff for the airport and seaport. But we also branched out and we worked closely with our South Narcotic, the Metro sheriffs at the time. They were the South Narcotic Squad, and we worked closely with them. And so we set up like an office space, a secondary space, not connected, but it was kind of the same kind of business. And we would have that space as well. We also had undercover apartments and other locations where we could conduct meetings and things. I had to give it an air of legitimacy, right? If I was being followed, we could, they would say, okay, follow us to a location, and they knew, okay, this location, you're not going back to a police station or a customs station. You're going to, an apartment on the beach or wherever it was that we did an apartment. So yeah, there were secondary locations. And yes, Mike, to your point, that location eventually got burnt because of a particular transaction that did not go the way the organization thought it would be. It was great. We had 5 different individuals identified, and each would send a suitcase, and we'd pull that trick where you give them the car, they drive away. We've got it like a kill switch on it, stops, a marked unit comes up and rolls up on them, and all of a sudden they're caught with this. We did that 5 times. And eventually this organization got hip to it and said, something's not right. So they actually put out a contract on myself and the informant that was there, thinking that I was an informant and was giving information to the police.
And the irony of that undercover was that we worked so closely with the Metro Dade South Narcotics Unit that when they would go undercover, it was just like the movie Goodfellas, in that they would dress up in uniform, get into a marked unit, and pull the car over. It was part of the operation. Pull the car over as if they were a dirty cop, and basically steal the dope back. They pull the car over. Back before 1995, we were able to use real narcotics. After 95, the rules changed. Everything had to be sham. But prior to that, we made a 10 kilo or 20 kilo delivery. We'd have the marked unit, who was an undercover detective, pull the car over, and the car would get pulled over. He grabbed the guy's license. He goes, you know my name, but I know yours. Just like the Goodfellas. He would take the guy's license, and we subsequently would indict and arrest later. And it got to the point we try to use as many ruses as we could to see how many times the bad guys would keep sending dope, and how many times. And this one situation where Alex was talking about, we got the organization to send dope on 5 occasions, and we were able to rip the dope off all 5, all 4. And when they sent the 5th one, and they realized, okay, something's wrong.
That's off.
And ultimately, the undercover part with the uniformed officer, the department management, basically had to stop it because their concern was the well-being. If the word got out in Colombia that there was dirty cops in Miami-Dade, God forbid, a police officer stopping a car that might have been, loaded with dope, would get shot. So we were able to do this about 6 or 7 times, and then we had to go to other means. But the greatest part was watching an undercover detective get into uniform and pulling out his marked unit from the garage and get ready to pull over the bad guy. But that we were very successful. We were very innovative.
No, of course, you have to be 10 steps ahead in these situations, and to have that foresight to even think, okay, well, let's do this 6 or 7 times, and then after that, let's cut it down for the reasons that you just mentioned, looking ahead, making sure you don't compromise safety of local law enforcement or federal for that matter. That's part of the, again, as you said, learning as you go. So moving along with the outline here, in December 1989, quote, approximately 8 kilograms of cocaine along with a sample of heroin was shipped to the United States by the Israel Tel Aviv Smuggling Organization and seized by U.S. Customs. This organization was comprised of the following individuals: Andres Quiros, Herman Torres, Maria Mercedes Martinez, and Luis Cano Ochoa. So these guys are, I don't know, sometimes they're major runners involved. Sometimes they're just merely gophers involved in the process. You first get wind of this. Again, it's above 5 kilos, hence the involvement, as we talked about earlier. As far as Israel Tel Aviv, again, I'm assuming another drug runner out of the Columbia area?
Yes, and that what was happening was at the time when we were operating contemporaneously with a joint Customs DEA task force that would be responding to seizures that were made at the airport. If it had nothing to do with anything that we were looking at, they would respond. For the most part, they would attempt to do controlled deliveries, but their method was basically that they would bring the dope in cargo back to the warehouse and then sit on it for 20 hours. And if nothing happened, because they were expecting internal conspiracy, some of the workers to remove it. And if nothing happened, they just take the cargo and bring it back to the DEA warehouse. And this was going on for days. And basically what happened, this organization got wind that DEA Customs or law enforcement was sitting on the load, but they wanted their load. And Alex had a very good informant who was able to introduce Alex as a bad guy to these bad guys. And Alex says, I work at the airport. I've got connections. I can still get your dope, your narcotics out from under the nose of DEA and Customs. Alex was so good in the UC capacity that he was able to convince these guys that I'll get your narcotics for a fee.
Yeah, what happened was, Mike, that they couldn't believe it. They were like, wait a minute, how is this going to happen? So but the greed, gets you, right? Like they're thinking, wait a minute, we know it's being watched because they're seeing it being watched, right? So they're like, well, how is this going to happen? So the informant says, look, they're interested in it. So I met with one of the individuals, and I explained to them, look, I work at the warehouse where they do it. I know when they bring it in, and I know when they take it out. So, when they stop watching it, I'll get it and I'll put it so that you can pick it up. And they were really, really onto that. They were really biting on that. So that's how we did that one.
It would take them down. So it was always Alex being in the undercover capacity, from a business owner warehouse to a warehouse worker. He was all encompassing. And he was so good at being a tremendous actor that the bad guys, they just couldn't resist. It was like, they just couldn't resist. They couldn't say no. Alex would talk to them. He was so convincing. They would turn over the money, turn over the keys to a car, whatever he wanted. No, but that was one of the most amazing cases, knowing that the dope was in the custody of law enforcement. Alex convinced these guys that he can get the dope out from law enforcement and deliver it.
It was the greed, Mike.
Yeah,
it was
the greed. Yeah, the greed. Right. Yeah. And I just wanted to mention, when you talk about the different locations, we were also very blessed. we had a $500,000 yacht that was, we had an informant who was, bad guys basically gave him $500,000. His job was to buy a yacht. We had a sat track on the boat. And the goal was they were going to go to the Bahamas. And the informant, when he came up with the money to buy the boat, he said, how should I title it? I said, make sure you title it, my undercover is Dr. Michael Snow. And I gave him an address, and the boat was titled to our, undercover business.
Mike, it was set up in a way that, I know it sounds so cliche, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you got the boat, you got the car, you got the this, but it was in those days in Miami, that's what it was about. And it was to impress, right? So, the level of, individuals in the organization we were dealing with would be impressed by that, right? Oh man, these guys are the real deal. They have a boat. We get people on the boat, take them out, and talk to them about business because we didn't want to talk, so we couldn't be recorded, and then all of a sudden they're on a boat, they're seeing, oh, these guys are the real deal. We were able to pick up loads at sea if we needed to. We had, able to go overseas and do it. We had control at airports all over. It's the impression we gave them, right? So for instance, a particular case, I remember when we went to Ecuador. So we had the same thing. Someone wanted to do a case. We told them, look, if you get the suitcase on, we'll be able. So they wanted to do a test of our organization with 10 kilos. So Miles and I went to Ecuador to put a suitcase of sham in there so that when it arrived at the airport in Miami, we'd have one of our guys, undercover guys, pull it out, which was me, right? And then if they saw that all work right and we turned it over to them, we would then get the other business. So that's what we did. We convinced our office, let us go to Ecuador. We'll go down, do the transaction. We coordinated with the embassy. We had worked with the DEA over there, and they took us.
What happened was, American Airlines at the time, this is obviously 9/11, and the rules, it was very lax with regard to who can get on the airport, who could not. And American Airlines at the time, all the ramp workers, it was, lack of a better term, it was a Puerto Rican mafia. And what happened was you had ramp, LaGuardia, Kennedy, O'Hare, Miami, and San Juan. And initially, I thought, Alex, this is a perfect opportunity to make Alex Alonso, Special Agent Alex Alonso, Alejandro Alvarez, an American Airlines employee. However, we started thinking about it, and management was working with us, and we worked very closely with the head of security, retired FBI agent Tom Dowd. And he said to Alex, he goes, listen, the union is so strong that if you come in as Alejandro Alvarez, they're going to make one phone call. If you tell them you came from LaGuardia, they're going to do a background on you, and they're going to realize that you never worked for the airline. So Alex comes up with this idea. We had, let's do a quality of life on these individuals. And we had a couple of very good female informants. And we started getting where they were going out to eat dinner, clubs they were going to. And we had the female informants meet them at the restaurants and clubs, just, haphazardly. They didn't know who they were. And they would, the women would, schmooze up to the ramp workers and then engage them and convince them that they needed to get dope in from South America, and they just bought it hook, line, and sinker. And then Alex was the guy that would be the undercover here, but we'd fly down to South America, put sham on it. They would pull a suitcase off for us. We'd pay them, and it was like a game of tag. All right, you're it. We're going to put you back to work, but you're going to give us the next guy and the next guy, and it was just like dominoes.
We had an incident like where we went to Ecuador, and it's one of those cases, and Miles is explaining, and we were going to just put the sham on the plane, and then we fly back, it goes back, we take it off, and then eventually do the turnover, right, to continue doing that credibility check. What happens was that when we get to Ecuador, we are coordinating with the DEA over there, and he introduces us to the authorities who are going to work with us. And I think it was the Ecuadorian police. Right. We squared everything away with them. We showed them, we had these sham packages, really sophisticated, very, very well made and manufactured. They could even test. There was no cocaine in it, but they could test. They would react to those Regent tests that we had, and we thought, man, this is great. This is the best thing. So we came armed with that. And Miles, thinking to make it even more legitimate, we're going to get a suitcase that really, looks like the suitcases that we were typically seizing at the airport. So he pulled one from our storage from a real recent seizure. So while we're there and we're getting ready to do the operation, get the suitcase on the plane, the customs official from Ecuador, they now have oversight of the airport, and they're like, no, this is not a police operation anymore. This is our operation, and we want to know how the hell you guys are doing this. Where is the cocaine, and what are you guys doing? So we're explaining to them, it's not cocaine. It's just a fake. We're having an operation. We're trying to do this. We're also trying to be mindful because we know that in these overseas locations, some of the ramp workers have relatives that work, and that's how they're so successful in being able to get things through, right? So we're not 100% being, open with them. We're just telling them that this is just a one-time deal, but we're doing it. But the customs authority is not convinced and sort of, not very friendly with us, and they demand that we show them where the real cocaine is. And they are expecting us to do this. So we're like, no, we don't. There is none. So he wants to test. He wants to test it, but he doesn't have those testers immediately available. But he has a dog that could alert. So we're thinking, oh no, they're going to alert. What if? And so the DEA agent that was with us coordinating says, no, don't worry. The dogs that they use are not really that good at detecting. And I'm thinking, I'm asking Miles, where did you get this suitcase from? He goes, well, I pulled it from the storage. So it's a real seizure, it's a real coke. So there's a lot of residue there, right? So when they bring the dog out, they actually locked us in a hangar, and it gave the impression. And there's customs guys with these long gun rifles being held. We were all surrounded. I'm thinking, this is not a good thing. And so out comes this dog from the back, and it's the most beautiful German Shepherd I've ever seen, right? Like really nice, very healthy dog. The German authorities had been training with them, and as a gift, gifted them this beautiful dog that detected. And the minute that dog saw that suitcase, he went to town on it, just ripping it apart. And we're like, oh no, we're going to jail here.
And it was a suitcase that was previously had cocaine in it at the airport. So, and I took out the kilos, kept them in seizure, and I just took the suitcase, and never thinking that the Ecuadorians were going to inspect our suitcase.
This guy really wants us now. He's like looking at us. When the dog is alerting, he's looking at us like, I got you guys now. So he gets into, finally someone brings him these tests, and he's ripping our kilos, just digging a knife into it, like you see in the movies, like, I almost thought at one point he was going to go, taste it and the whole works, but he didn't. He tested it, and it wasn't. Thank God it didn't test. It didn't test. So we were off the hook that time, but it was a hairy situation.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, and then again, as you said earlier, that kind of enhances. Okay, next case, we're not going to do that. We're going to think this through and try a different tactic. And it actually segues perfectly into one of the other parts of the outline, because as you were discussing even before mentioning this case, they, meaning the traffickers, want to make sure, at least in theory, not knowing who you guys are just yet, that they can get it past customs. That's the main thing. Can we get it past customs? And that was the main thing that they thought for this January 19th, 1990 shipment, where now it's up. It was 8 at first. Now it's 87. So they've upped the game significantly now. It's part of building trust, which you guys had done in the short month that you had found out about them and they about you in return. 87 kilograms of cocaine was shipped to the U.S. from Barranquilla, Colombia, on board a Tampa Airlines cargo flight. So instead of a ship, they used a plane, and the cocaine was secreted inside a shipment of wearing apparel. This organization believed that U.S. Customs Service undercover special agents and FBI undercover agents were in a position at the Miami International Airport to smuggle the cocaine past U.S. Customs. And of course, you were able to get that shipment by in the meantime to keep building the investigation. But I mean, listen, transporting drugs aboard anything, especially nowadays post 9/11, where the security is a bit tighter, is just about impossible. Back then, things were a little bit more lax. But even then, 87 kilograms, and I thought 8 was a lot. To transport 87, they must have really hit it well. And in general, I mean, besides them knowing, I'm sure, about your investigation, how are, in theory, dealers able to sometimes smuggle quantities of that amount past customs?
Well, Mike, it's a variety of things, right? So it all depended on where in the transportation chain you were needed, right? So in most cases where we dealt with is they have the ability to get it on the plane or on the ship, but they don't have the ability to take it out or don't have the transportation part of it or the ability to take it out in the US when it arrives, right? So so sometimes we would pose ourselves as having the ability on the other side, as was the case in Ecuador, or I believe in this case, they had the ability to get it on and we would have the ability to get it off, right? And so that's how we sold it to them. If it was a small shipment, we would say, I have a cousin that works on the ramp, right? Or I work on the ramp. And depending on who you're dealing with, right? If they know the ramp, then you use a different tactic. But if they didn't, you would just say, look, I have someone that works on the ramp and they'll get it out for me. If it's cargo, then we'd use a different tactic. But we would always insert ourselves in such a spot where it would be attractive to this organization, depending on how they did. Most of them could get it on at the ports, at the airports, on private aircraft. We would sell the fact that we could either transport it or take it off for them because we had the means.
No, of course. And that, go ahead, Miles.
And part of the means, because we had this legitimate warehouse, and Alex being in the business prior to coming into customs, knew so many importers and customs house brokers that Alex was able to convince and take in confidence legitimate businesses who were willing to use our warehouse for the movement of cargo, their legitimate cargo moving, and the benefit for them was, as long as they were using our warehouse, they weren't paying any rent and they were getting free space. And our business would be so legitimate that when individuals would come and look at the business, like Alex said earlier, the movement of cars, trucks, moving in and out, where Alex also was able to, he worked with some of the shipping lines in his past life, was able to obtain a refrigerated container where we were able to actually put false walls in the container. So containers going to South America, Alex would show the prospective smugglers, hey, listen, if you want to use containerized shipping, I have a refrigerated container. The refrigerated container has false walls in it. This is how it opens up. He would show them the whole thing, and the guys would just fall in love with Alex and fall in love with the method that Alex offered up. And again, it went back to Alex's prior life, prior business, and being able to convince these businesses to work with us. And they were truly, and it was not divulging anything. They knew what we were doing, but they was willing to partake and assist us. And their benefit was they were getting free rent, free movement, and so life was great. We never wanted to have that sterile business. Most companies, agencies that went undercover would have a sterile business. People would walk in, it just didn't look right. It looked like you're moving into a brand new home with no furniture. Alex knew that it was important that we have legitimate business, and that was what another part of his great assets was he understood the business. And I always played his partner as a Jewish guy with the money from New York who came down and became business with him. I was the Jewish guy. I played myself. I was always the business, the money guy, who started the business, and we became partners.
Yeah. This is volume 12 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. And you guys certainly played the role well because the dragnets were always able to materialize. We're talking with retired U.S. Customs Special Agents Alex Alonso and Miles Sonn. Tom Silphone, I see your question in the chat. I'm going to highlight it at the end, but thanks for the super chat, buddy. And hello to Kevin Pierce in the chat. Didn't want to forget about you either, my friend. So the dragnet at the beginning of 90 is beginning to come into play here because you had the shipments. Now the money's being involved as well. $10,000 goes to Fabio Ramirez Ochoa, the money being delivered in air quotes, as it mentions in the PDF on behalf of Israel Tel Aviv. So now you have the currency in addition to the actual narcotics themselves. You moved in a month later, February of 90, on Quiros, Torres, Martinez, and Garcia, and made those arrests. And that's part one of this operation. So as this is beginning to materialize, now you have to formulate an arrest plan. You're concluding this portion of the operation. So tell me about that process.
Well, the ultimate goal was that when we would make arrests, the secret, we had some really sophisticated, great detectives, Hispanic detectives, who Cuban Americans, a couple of Dominican detectives that were very, very good at interviewing as well as convincing our targets of their criminal liability. And they were very good at getting these individuals to basically flip immediately. And the one thing that we had going for us, besides this being an OCDF case, and we had our very own Assistant United States Attorney, David Troyer, who was absolutely magnificent. We also had a counterpart at the state level. And back then, a 5 kilo minimum midman at the federal side was a 10-year midman. At the state, there was no minimum mandatories. And the detectives that we worked with were so good at getting our targets to flip with the option of being charged statewide and not looking at a midman, that we would have everybody cooperating, and they would be flipping literally on each other. Just because they wanted to get out of the criminal liability. And it's a tribute, again, to the guys that we work with that were phenomenal detectives who had that ability to, talk, and they had the rap. They were able to talk to these guys, and they were all gentlemen. All of us were gentlemen. We never heavy-handed. Wasn't the alpha male coming in and the tough guy. It wasn't the new sheriff in town. We were always giving those guys the opportunity to do the right thing.
No, and we were able to structure those arrests and cases, Mike, in a way where one would not impact the other. In other words, the goal was to try to keep extending the operation, keep extending what we had going, right? Because now all of a sudden this operation, as much as arrests and identifying other targets, we were also, it was almost like a money-making business operation too, right? Because they were paying us to launder funds, and then with those proceeds, we then fund additional, resources, right? We get the state-of-the-art radios, communication, wiring things. We'd get offices. We'd have, at one point, we were funding 2 or 3 actual offices to help monitor all the investigations, because the group was generating so many cases. We were handing cases off to other agents to work independently, right? We were getting bits of information. So we identify this one organization. We're working it. We take it down. They then cooperate, and some of it would be related to other areas where they were in, and so other agents would take these cases and go off on it. So there were original cases, spin-off cases, back cases, and it was just a constant thing of us going. At one point, Mike, I was the primary undercover, but we had, like Miles said, excellent other undercovers in other areas. But there were so many investigations going on that I remember one point being out at night at some parking lot in one of the many supermarkets in Miami, waiting to deliver a suitcase. And when I handed it to the individual, he told me, "Oh, this is the 10, right?" And I didn't even know. I thought, "Oh no, I thought we were giving him the 5." I was totally confused because we had done 2 undercover meetings that same evening, handing over dope to one guy, handing over dope to another guy. It was that crazy. I knew at that point it was just getting overwhelmed.
Right. And there comes a point where you have to bring it to a head, because you don't want that crossover to the point where people can get hurt, both informants and agents alike. So keeping that in mind is critical. But when you guys made the arrest in February of '90, a new player came to light, as we have here, and I'll read the paragraph from the PDF. On February 16th, 1990, as we mentioned earlier, after the arrest, special agents from the United States Customs Service seized approximately 125 kilograms of cocaine. The cocaine was secreted inside a shipment of leather goods, which previously cleared U.S. Customs, which goes back to one of the paragraphs we cited from earlier. The cocaine was discovered by the consignee of the merchandise, who notified U.S. Customs. Now, this is the new player that comes into the fold. To the use of a Customs confidential informant, Julio Rojas, the owner of the cocaine, was contacted in Bogota, Colombia. And Rojas was advised by the confidential informant that he had, quote-unquote, friends who worked at the Miami International Airport who were in a position to rip off the cocaine previously seized by U.S. Customs. Miles, you brought up a good point earlier, where when these guys are facing the criminal liability, they start ratting on each other, or in the process of making arrest, other players you didn't even know about or had minimal idea about come to the light. Rojas comes to the light. So now the operation begins to get him and involve him in this spider web, as you so aptly put it earlier, Alex. So tell me about that. We'll start with you, Miles.
This was a situation where we worked so closely with DEA and the FBI that they knew who Alex and Miles were with regard to internal conspiracies. This came about, one of the agents that we work with the FBI, they just happened to get a phone call from a defense attorney that his client opened up his shipment of leather goods and found all this cocaine and was petrified. He then calls Miles and Alex. We respond to the warehouse, and the interesting part of this was that this shipment was never destined to leave the cargo facility. What was supposed to have happened, the owner of this business in Miami, his father was in Colombia manufacturing leather goods. Their leather goods were compromised somewhere in the airport in Bogota by other bad guys putting in cocaine in their legitimate merchandise. It lands in Miami. It was supposed to be ripped off. Customs that day might have been at the airport inspecting. It got on a truck, got to the consignee, the Sonn. He opens up the boxes, sees this cocaine. He almost has a heart attack, and he calls his attorney. Attorney calls the FBI. FBI calls Miles and Alex. We respond, and we're looking at this, and we realize right away that no one else understood the mechanisms, what was going on. At first, everyone was convinced that he had to be the owner of the dope. And Alex and Miles is to say, wait a minute, this looks like an internal conspiracy. It was never meant to be for him. And basically what happened at that point, we seized the cocaine. Alex advised the owner, listen, you are going to get a phone call. The bad guys are going to find out that the stuff was not ripped off of the warehouse, and you are going to be, looked for. And when it happens, you need to contact me. And exactly that occurred, where the guy calls Alex and said, listen, they were literally coming to kidnap him and tie him up and shake him down for his dope. And he was legitimate business owner who got compromised. And I remember telling his attorney, I said, can you imagine if this was found by customs at the airport? They put a transponder in the box, and it gets delivered to the consignee. He opens up the box, the beeper goes off, customs comes in the front door, guns drawn, don't move, you're under arrest. How would you, as an attorney at the initial appearance, try to convince the judge and the U.S. attorney that this guy, your client, was not part of this whole deal? And it was really frightening to think that a legitimate person, which probably happened, was caught up in something he had nothing to do with. And ultimately, when he made the call to Alex, Alex responded along with other agents to his warehouse when this guy came and tried to kidnap him, and Alex was able to make the arrest of the subject, attempting to arrest the business owner. But again, it was all about our contacts in all these other agencies that knew, anything at the airport, seaport, Miles and Alex, call Miles and Alex. And at the seaport, we had tremendous working relationship with the inspectors. So the inspectors, on top of what we were developing on the side, would also confirm what we were thinking with regard to possible internal conspiracies. On this example, when I explained to the inspectors, this is what I believe happened, they were able to produce the workers, the log of that day, who was involved, who was working that day, and who was the truckers. So we were able to discern who might have been involved and go and ultimately make arrests on the internal conspiracy at the airport.
Mm-hmm. The original spot.
The original spot.
And Mike, at the time, we carried beepers back in those days. Those.
It's the 90s.
And I remember telling the guy, listen, someone's going to come here, because if you're not the real owner of this, then somebody's using you to transport this. And he was petrified. So I told him, whatever you do, if you find somebody strange following you or anything like that, please call me. And if there's an emergency, just beep me 911. Just like, that was the code back then, right? If you give me a phone number and you attach a 911, it's an emergency, right? I guess he took me literally, because he just kept beeping me, and I would get 100 calls a day on these things, right? So I'm thinking, I would keep telling Miles, I'm getting a 911 call. I just don't know who it is. We had done all kinds of cases, so I would not know. And it had been, some time had passed after we had talked to him. I would just keep getting 911, 911. I'm thinking, man, who is it? So there was no number. I wouldn't know. And finally, somehow he got through, and he was in a panic. and we had to rush over there. And sure enough, we found the guy, and he had duct tape, he had rope, he had all kinds of torturing type tools.
Yeah.
And we were able to make the arrest.
Oh, thank goodness, literally in the nick of time. And that's the unfortunate part. There's that collateral damage. People who, as you said, are innocent, have nothing to do with it, want nothing to do with it, end up getting involved. And to these higher ups in this drug chain, they're just pawns in the game. They don't care. It's just the cost of doing business. But that cost is not a lowering of stock in the product per se. That cost is someone's life potentially, which darn near happened here. Now, Rojas gets comfortable, and in March of 90, he sends various shipments out. 5-on-1. He ups the game, much like the previous dealers, to 53 on the next shipment. And he's doing this under the belief that a customs agent who is undercover, so he doesn't know, obviously, it's a customs agent, can help him facilitate the entry. Now, of course, this is your case. I know you had multiple undercovers, but just for context and clarity for the audience, one of those agents, I'm assuming, was one of you guys?
Yeah, it was usually me, Mike, because I would be the guy that either posed as the ramp worker or as the guy at the airport or seaport or wherever it was that had the ability to pull it off.
Okay. So tell me about dealing with Rojas, or at least one of his aides, if you didn't deal with Rojas directly.
So I'm trying to remember who Rojas was.
Julio Rojas.
In the suitcases. And he thought you were the tracatero for Amparo. And that you were the guy who could pull everything off the
Yeah. So Rojas, it was directly with Rojas. So he wanted to meet me, and because he wanted to know how, what's happening, like what's going on. They always want to know the whole area, because they don't want to they can't lose any of this merchandise, otherwise they're up for it, right? Because if they recommend that someone and they then are responsible for losing it, yes, I'm the one who's seizing, but they're gonna get ultimately killed or whatever is going to happen to him. So he wanted to understand how it worked. And I met with him and the confidential source, and I explained how it worked, right? In this case, I posed as I have someone in the airport, because again, I didn't know if he knew people in the airport and he was connected in the airport. You never know that. So rather than saying, oh, I work here and there, which could be verified, I always left it in a way, Mike, where it was vague enough to be believable, but also vague enough to be untraceable, right? That they couldn't really 100% detect it or not detect it, right? So but I knew enough about the airport because I worked there, and I knew, even as a customs agent, the ins and outs, so I could talk enough. And we had arrested enough ramp workers that had cooperated, who would talk to us about how they did things, how they worked flights, how they came in, how they were badged in with other badges, and there was never a record of them being at the airport. And all that intel I had is how I explained it to him and dropped it in little hints so that Rojas would believe, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about. So I would just say, listen, when I have something nobody knows, you just call me, tell me a description, give it to me when it is, this is what we charge, this is what it is, this is how I do it. I have my cousin that works, and if he's not working that night, it doesn't matter, because I have other individuals that will let me in, and I can go and I can get it. I know the airport. I have a pass. I give him everything he needed to hear for it to work. And so that would get them talking. I'd usually be wired at these meetings. It depended on which meeting, right? This particular one that I'm talking about, and I would get recordings, and then we'd have him, whether or not he ever came to pick up the suitcases himself or had, one of his flunkies do it, it wouldn't matter, because we would have those conversations recorded and logged into evidence, and then subsequent, the overt act after that would be what would get him involved in the conspiracy. So that's why we were successful in that point, because we knew enough about the ins and outs, but not enough for them to check, and then their need to know, their greed, and because then he's thinking, well, wow, I might be able to do this on my own with this guy. I was a contact for them. I was like a something he needed, right? And now he could do his own deals if he used me, right? So for his own greed and his own, special purpose, he would want to find out more, and that caused him to talk more, and we'd get good evidence that way.
And our female, the confidential source that we had for many years was a Colombian American born in Colombia. She was from Bogota, and she was like our office manager, and the undercover world, and the bad guys knew her as the Colombian who had every contact in Colombia. Alex, being the Cuban, was her tacatero, who was her boyfriend, who was the guy that could pull. She convinced everybody in Colombia, I have the boyfriend, I can do anything at the airport. And it was basically her ability to convince the bad guys in Colombia that her boyfriend can get it off. And what basically happened, it got to the point where suitcases would come up with no consignees. They were like literally jumping on board in Colombia to try to get their suitcases full of dope in, because they thought that she was that good. And what we would do, we have dope and not have no one to deliver it to, where our narcotics unit detectives would actually do reverses with our kilos and selling it in kilo, cheap enough where everybody wanted to buy. And the operation, again, being certified, allowed us to take part of that money and send it back to Colombia to the shippers. And with that said, we would then advise DEA, who would then in turn work with the national police and go after the targets in Colombia. That's how successful the operation was. But it was Alex posing as the Miami Hialeah Cuban who can do anything at the airport, and his girlfriend, being Colombian, was able to convince everybody in Colombia, to the point, ultimately at the very end, the whole thing shut down was because it was in Colombia, in Cali, Bogota. Our business became so known nefariously that they never knew it was a cop. They just thought it was undercover, that, hey, we're losing too much dope. And there was a hit. There was a contract on both of them.
It was wild, Mike, because it was getting to a point where I was so involved, like we both were, right? We wouldn't go home. We would just after a long day of negotiating or turning in or arrest, and then we'd sit back at our undercover warehouse and just try to clear our heads. And all of a sudden we'd get a call, hey, there's something else coming. A phone call will come in, something to this effect: hey, can you pick up my aunt at the airport? She's coming in tonight. This is her phone number, and that would be the baggage tag. And she's coming in with her 15-year-old daughter. I don't want them to be alone. That means 15 kilos are coming in, and you'll know her. She's the one with the red dress and green dress, whatever. That's the suitcase in, or wherever the packaging. Those were the messages. And we've just finished this long day of back and forth, and here we go again, right? So it was that point. I remember at one point leaving my house one morning. Don't even remember what day it was. I'm just leaving my house, getting a call from my supervisor saying, you need to get to the airport right now. You got to go to Puerto Rico. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, and from Puerto Rico, you're going to New York to meet your partner out there, meaning Miles. Miles was already in New York, already setting the stage for what was to be. And I'm like, what am I doing? I don't even know. You're going to Puerto Rico. You're meeting with the San Juan agents. You're picking up, I think it was $500,000. And from there, and some passports. And from there, you're getting on a plane and you're going to LaGuardia, and there Miles will meet you and tell you what it is. So that's what I would do. Like, I'd coming out in a Hawaiian shirt, leaving Miami, going to 20 degrees in New York, freezing, and they're authorizing me to go buy some warm clothes. Where am I going to buy warm clothes? Puerto Rico doesn't have warm clothes, so I go to Puerto Rico, meet up. I'm supposed to pick up $500,000 from some guy who our agents are supposed to be watching him, and they're all over the place. So we coordinated everything. I'm in the hotel room waiting. Okay, great. And they're calling me, hey, we don't see the guy anywhere. I'm like, all right, I'll just wait here to, 5 minutes later, I get a call from the guy, and he's like, where are you? I'm here in the hotel. I'm like, what do you mean you're in the hotel? He goes, yeah, I'm downstairs. I'm like, so I go, okay, I'll meet you downstairs. So I call the perimeter guys, like, hey, you can see the guy? He's in the hotel. He said he's waiting for me downstairs. And they're like, we don't see anybody. I'm like, man, what's going on? So I'm like, all right, I'm going to go downstairs. Watch for me. So I go downstairs. The minute the elevator's open, this guy, he's sitting in coveralls with a bag, like a trash bag, filled with money. And he's just sitting there on the fountain, like looking around. I'm like, that's the guy. How can nobody see this guy? So I walk up to him, I talk to him, and yep, sure enough, it's the guy. He gives me the 500, he gives me the trash bag. And I'm thinking, great, well, now we got this. They've got to be seeing this. And I go back up and open it up, and sure enough, there's the money with the passports and everything. And they didn't see him. They never saw him. It's like, how can you not have seen him? So anyway, so here I go now, having to get a suitcase, get on the plane, go to New York. And I meet Miles there. And the minute right off the plane, right to a hotel in LaGuardia that was across the street, I think it was the Holiday Inn, and go up to the 4th floor where these two individuals are waiting for me to give them the passports, because they're going to go to Colombia. They're getting out because they know authorities are looking for them. Little did they know we were right there. And sure, here I give them the passport. And while I'm doing that, they're asking me if I know anybody who could take somebody out. I'm like, yeah. So that morning I come out the house, and I'm supposed to bring milk back that night. and now not only did I go to Puerto Rico, I'm in New York, and I don't know when I'm coming home. And so that's how the mentality, you'd have to adjust and be flexible like that. And meanwhile, Miles, I don't know if that was not the same case where you told the New York authorities, hey, I got my partner coming in 25 kilos. There's just crazy cases like that.
Well, what happened is New York, in Queens, a lot of Colombian, dopers at the time the Colombians wanted to get loads to New York. The problem was internal conspiracies at Kennedy and LaGuardia were not as common as they were at MIA, because they didn't have the workers. So we were able to convince, again, we bring it to Miami and we'll just get it up to New York, wherever you want it to go. So we work very closely with New York Customs and New York DEA and the state troopers. For whatever reason, Customs at the time didn't work very closely, Kennedy Customs, with NYPD guys. And so they worked closely with the troopers. This particular occasion, Alex, again, it's real dope, is on an American Airlines flight with a suitcase of 30 kilos. He's landing at JFK. And I arrive at JFK an hour before his flight lands, and I'm not thinking like a New Yorker. And I went up to a uniformed Port Authority cop, and I identified myself. I said, listen, my partner is coming in with a suitcase. It contains narcotics, and we're doing a controlled delivery. Is it possible I can get a police escort to my car? And he gives me this look, the typical New Yorker. He goes, I can see, you got to be kidding me. You're trying to entrap me. Something's going on here. He goes, you want this to go down? You got to call my manager. And I said, thank you very much. He didn't say a word. I didn't say a word. Alex arrived. We get into my car. We head over to the Holiday Inn. It turns out that the two recipients, husband and wife, she's 8 months pregnant. And I had to, my fear was that she would possibly go into labor or miscarriage. The baby, upon taking delivery and placing her under arrest. So I had to contact the customs agents in New York to make sure they had EMS on standby with an ambulance in case she went into labor. That was my concern and fear. She was 8 months pregnant, coming to pick up a load of dope. And it was and Alex went from Miami suitcase. He had 15 minutes to acquaint himself with the room and what the deal was all about. He didn't even know who the recipients of the dope were. It was that constant. Every week he was flying all over the place. We're making deliveries. But the 8 month pregnant lady, and subsequently, of course they cooperated. No one wants to look at jail time. So to get out of their mid-mans, they had to acceptance responsibility and cooperate. That was the two rules for a defendant. They had to accept and help. And they made the phone calls to the next person who was going to. But that was what Alex was doing, 3-4 times a month, flying all over the place. And I told you before, back then when the cell phones were just coming about, they were analog, and when area codes at the time meant something. The 305, 212, it was 718 wasn't even a number yet. And we thought we were so good that Alex's undercover phone had 4 numbers in it. So you had New York, it had Puerto Rico, it had Miami, and had LA. And if he was dealing with someone in LA, he would give them the LA area code number, and it was forwarded to the Miami number. The bad guys thinking he was in the city. And so we were on the cutting edge of the beginning of technology. So Alex was that guy who we were constantly putting forward, but it got to the point where it was just overwhelming. And my concern, even as his partner, his cover agent, as case agents, and like my kid brother, the health and safety of him became my paramount issue. And it was hey, it's time to get out of this and move on.
Yeah, that's the key too, knowing when, as we talked about a couple times throughout the show, knowing when to pull the plug. Because one of the things I wanted to go back to, and we'll put a bow on the Rojas portion because this really begins to ramp up at the tail end of 1990, is it was mentioned in the PDF that you sent over, Miles, you had an unlimited amount of time. But just because you have a lot of time does not necessarily mean you want to take a lot of time. Now, you don't want to rush it. You want to make sure everything's done step by step as it needs to be. But still, if this is dragging on 2, 3, 4 years and it doesn't need to, it's an unnecessary risk. So when things started to take shape and you started to know who the players were, and you're talking about quantity of cocaine that's being transported, amongst other drugs, heroin was mentioned earlier, and currency involved with it, what was the timetable for when you wanted to wrap it up now with Rojas? Were you thinking 6 months, a year? How long did you feel and want it to take?
My position in 1990 was we were going strong. Everything was great. We were like ascending to the to our we're ascending to the top of the mountain. Everything was going great. It was like almost like a game in the sense that like every day we were winning, and we knew there's going to be a point in time we can't win. It's like going to Vegas and going to the crap table and winning and blackjack and winning and winning and winning. And one of our co-agents, Gene Blahado with DEA, who was very, very close to us, where we worked very well together, always told me, Miles, the secret, and he was a Baltimore City cop prior to the DEA, worked in New York. He was a little older than us, and he had more experience. And he said, the secret in this game is knowing when to get out when you're on top. The last thing you want to do is coming down the side of the mountain and getting out when you're no longer on the top. He goes, you want to peak and then call it a day. And so that always resonated in both of our heads, knowing there's going to be a point in time where we're just going to have to, change course. And ultimately, it was the transition came when Alex was selected for a position actually in Caracas, Venezuela, as the assistant country attaché, and that by Alex being selected for a position in South America, that basically undid the undercover operation in Miami, and we were able to shut it down. But it was a point in time where Alex knew it was time for me to do something else.
And it was coinciding, Mike, with we had already been burnt on one occasion, and there had been a contract out, and so we were getting lucky? We had to shut down the particular our main warehouse. Our other one, there had been a shootout in it, and so we were like losing. We lost that, and so we were not. We were thinking, well, do we start over again somewhere else? So how long can we continue this, right? So. And then, of course, the U.S. Attorney's Office was looking to, they didn't want to continue because sometimes we'd have to launder money and sometimes we'd have to, allow things to go a certain way. And they wanted to put more pressure on arrests and seizure of assets and stuff. So it was just every case begot another case and another case and another case. And it was just no end to it. But those are things that we just mentioned were sort of the catalyst to get it to start shutting down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we see that ramp up, like I said, at the tail end of 90, September and October of 90. Now you're going into their home court, if you will. You're operating previously in Miami, Florida. You know what's going on in Colombia. Now you could actually finally infiltrate down there. And the paragraph reads as followed. In September and October of 1990, as we just stated, special agents of the U.S. Customs Service, along with detectives from the Metro-Dade Police Department, acting in an undercover capacity, successfully infiltrated a narcotics smuggling organization operating out of the El Dorado Airport in Bogota, Colombia, and the Miami International Airport, naturally in Miami, Florida. 3 suitcases totaling approximately 100 pounds of cocaine was seized and subsequently delivered, whereupon 3 individuals were arrested, indicted, and convicted on a variety of federal narcotics charges. And the second paragraph we'll read here before we get back to Miles and Alex states, in December 1990, quote, a U.S. Customs Service confidential source, along with an undercover agent, infiltrated a large-scale narcotics smuggling organization operating out of the international airport in Bogota as well as Cali, Colombia. So 2 different locations in Colombia. This organization is a loose confederation of independent smugglers, and this organization has a plentiful supply of narcotics as well as the means to place the narcotics on board commercial air carriers destined for the United States. To date, this investigation has resulted in 17 seizures totaling in excess of 900 pounds of cocaine, as well as 20 violators being arrested. And of course, those violators are listed here in this PDF attached. Now, you've gone overseas before. It's not anything new. It's not your first time, but each case is different than the last in that you have to think, okay, I know how I can operate on my grounds. I know how I can operate in the US and specifically in Miami, Florida, where you guys were based out of. Now I'm going into their yard. What are the factors I need to look out for? What's on my side? What's not on my side? What could go right? What could go wrong? It's a lot to think about in a case like this where so much is at stake. So heading over to Bogota and then later on Cali too, when you have multiple locations to keep track of now and monitor, tell me about that process to making sure everything was seamless in a place that, you know, you're familiar with, but it's not home. You're away from home.
Well, one of the things contemporaneously to our undercover, one of the other operations that we had at the time, U.S. Customs had a program called Super Carrier Initiative Program, where airlines could be fined if contraband was found on their aircraft. And when contraband was found, wherever the plane may have landed, Customs would send agents and inspectors overseas to assess their security operation at these different airports. Myself and Alex, we would combine our undercover operation. We would make contact with DEA in Colombia, and our goal was to save the airlines from fines. Our objective was to try to find what occurred at the other end and who may have been involved. The goal was, instead of having narcotics or Colombian narcotics officers seize and possibly steal and resmuggle, we basically worked with DEA. DEA was able to put informants into the airports, and the objective was allow the narcotics to get on the plane, let the narcotics come to the United States, let us attempt to make either a controlled delivery or an arrest on the seizure at the airport in MIA, and we would keep the airlines off the hook for fines and penalties. So the airlines were much appreciative of the fact that they weren't getting fined. DEA at first looked at us like we were the three-headed monster coming into their territory and trying to usurp them, until they realized we are not here in any way, shape, or form to take from you what you do in Colombia. Let us see if we can make the arrest and seizure up here. It'll be predicated on what you provided us. We would tell them, listen, if you have information that a suitcase is coming up, don't make the seizure. Let it come up, call us, and we will have the inspectors sit on the plane, watch the ramp rats attempt to smuggle or get the stuff off the plane. And that's where all those seizures came from. It was because the cooperation of DEA overseas and with U.S. Customs at the time. Customs did not have an attaché in Bogota, so we had to depend on DEA, and they realized that we were not there. We were partners. We were not there in any way, shape, or form to mislead them. And that was the Super Carrier Initiative program allowed us administratively to go down there and develop informants and work closely with DEA. And that's where this all came from. In Cali, in Bogota, in Cartagena, we were everywhere, in Colombia. And the airlines appreciated the fact that we were not finding them, that we were documenting informants.
And it opened the gates, Mike, to get into there, because otherwise going down there strictly in an undercover capacity was very difficult to do. First of all, very it was too dangerous to allow, independent, because once you're there, you're not going to be able to say, oh, I'm going to be just in this little area here. No, you'll have to commit to going to, farms and other locations where you might not be comfortable and will not be safe. So this was one way how we were able to do it strategically, using our informants to get in there. I traveled there under that guise and did have some meetings, but it was nothing. It was very preliminary, right? So that, because you never knew. And my fear was always, what if I bump into someone that has had the experience of going through our undercover warehouse and process and has been previously arrested or something to that effect? That was too dangerous. So using this premise, the Carrier Initiative program, we were able to go and do it that way.
And on one particular occasion, this is an interesting story. We were down, myself and Alex were at the embassy as, quote, customs officials, not as undercover. And that one particular night, we went to a restaurant bar, and to have dinner, and everyone's speaking Spanish, and the embassy personnel, everybody's speaking Spanish, and someone taps him on the shoulder and says, "Where are you from?" And he goes, "Hi, Aaliyah, same point with you." And the guy got a Cuban in this restaurant that we were in Bogota. He had Alex's accent.
Noted my accent,
and he goes, "What are you down here?" He goes, "Same as you."
What are you doing?
Yeah.
And I go, "No, what are you doing here?" Like, like, who are you to talk to me? And he goes, like basically giving me the wink and the nod, like, you're doing the same thing I am.
Right.
And he asked me, "What do you do?" And of course I said import-export business. And that was, I might as well have said I smuggle drugs, because that's, if you were in the import-export business, that's what you did in Miami. Wait a minute, you're in Miami, import-export? And I gave him my card, and he goes, "Hey, yeah, I'm in that business too, so maybe we can hook up and talk." And so we made a pact when we both got back to Miami, we'd meet and talk. Yeah. And we did.
But the irony of the story was we're down there in this restaurant in the official capacity as customs officials, and all of a sudden he had to go from this customs official, from someone tapping him on the shoulder, to his undercover capacity, from Alex Alonso, customs official, to Alejandro Alvarez, the import exporter, just like that, like in the restaurant, the guy just tapping him on the shoulder from the accent.
Right.
It was like in Bogota,
of all places.
Of all places.
Yeah.
Of all places.
Two Cubans. Yeah.
You always got to be on for that reason. It's kind of like.
That's how cool Alex was, that he was able to switch from that official instantaneously into his undercover role, and just play it off
and keep it going. Keep it going. Now all of a sudden you're on another case. You're building another case. It's kind of like a guy in the New York, New Jersey area in the 80s and 90s in the waste management business. He kind of knew.
You say that, you're not
really up to.
Right.
Yeah, we know what you're into. We know who you're running with, and one of the players that spawns off from this investigation now, that puts a bow on it, going from the end of 90 into 91 now, and I'll read it. In December of 1990 and again in January of 1991. Special agents of the U.S. Customs Service and the DEA, undercover and cover agents, traveled to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and met with an individual named Jorge Avedo, who is currently, at the time at least, a federal fugitive out of Baltimore. And he was interested in smuggling 1,000 kilograms via cargo into Miami, Florida, where else the undercover agent has convinced the target of this investigation that his import and export company will be able to clear the cargo containing the cocaine through U.S. Customs without any problems. Was this the guy you bumped into in Bogota, or somebody else?
No. This guy, Mike. So this investigation was actually a culmination of different agencies, right? So we have our DEA partner who has been looking for this individual as a fugitive. He's been living in Brazil. Our South narcotics guys arrest an individual who owns a travel agency who happens to know that guy. He comes to us and says, "Listen, working off cooperation, I can give you this individual." In fact, I've been talking to him. We're talking about smuggling a load between 500 to 1,000 kilos. I can just talk to you, introduce you to him, and there you go. So we talked to our leadership, and they said, "Absolutely, no problem. Go down there. And so, here we are. We're traveling to Rio, Brazil. And in fact, this guy, Jorge, pays for our tickets to travel, myself and the informant. And so we did. We traveled down there. We meet with the local DEA office in Rio, and we brief them on the case. And it's an important case. They have a fugitive living in their city. And he's looking to smuggle 1,000 kilos of cocaine. This is something pretty big. So we end up setting up this operational plan to say, okay, this could be the culmination of our case. We've had a lot of investigations leading up to this. How good to seal this up with 1,000-kilo deal, pick up a fugitive. It'll be a great case for our operation, right? So that's what we do. We brief it at the embassy, but the DEA attaché at the time, he was a little bit concerned, and rightfully so. Rio was a dangerous place and didn't want us to move outside of the area, and in fact limited us to a meeting just at the hotel where we were at. I told him, listen, this guy's a Cuban guy. He's been on the lam for 5 years. This guy's going to want to, I'm Cuban. The informant is Cuban. He's going to want to show off. He's going to want to take us around and, get drinks, dinner. I know that's going to happen. I just know it. And he's like, nope, you got to do everything right then and there. So, okay, that was what the plan was, right? So we do that. We set up the meeting, and the time frame that he gave us, he doesn't show up. And so we're getting ready to break off and everything's fine. But then he calls and he says, hey, I'm on my way now. He had gotten into an accident, so he's showing up. So we've lost a lot of the perimeter team because they're not. So Miles, Miles was always there for everything, right? So he's always overseeing, making sure security's set, making sure all the things are going right. And so he's like, hey, look, he's calling it in. They're coming, and it's okay. Let's have the meeting. So the minute the guy arrives, I'm sitting on the table outside on Copacabana Beach with the informant. I tell him, look, the guy's going to come. The first thing he's going to tell us, he wants to leave. We can't. We got to tell him, we got to come up with an excuse, and I need your help to come up with an excuse. So tell him we can't leave. He's like, yeah, no worries. We'll do that. No problem. The minute the guy shows up, he's like, all right, guys, hey, what's happening? He gives the informant his big hug. They know each other good. He shakes my hand. He looks at me. He goes, all right, great. Oh, man, been hearing a lot about you. Come on, let's go. That's his first right off the bat, Mike. So wait a minute. So in my mind, I'm thinking, no, I can't go. But I know it's the right thing to do. Up to this point, I've been doing so much undercover work. I've gotten a little bit, I guess, cavalier. That's a great word, Miles. Thinking, everything's right, no problem. What could go wrong? And but we sit down and we start talking. We order a beer, but he's got a car waiting there. He's like, man, I'm going to show you guys Brazil, especially Rio. I've got this town covered and connected. And the informant, instead of helping the situation, he's like, yeah, let's go, man. Let's get out of here. Right. 2 minutes ago, he's telling me, yeah, don't worry. I'll help you, back you up. But he wants this case to go because, his sentence depends on it. So anyways, there was a cross point at the time. Should I go? Should I not? Should I go? Should I not? And I decided to go. I decided to get in that car, and off we go. And off we go, Mike. And he's looking at me, and and everybody's having a good time in the car. And I'm like, I'm getting nervous now as I'm seeing, Miles is across the street looking at us like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I'm leaving in the car. And all of a sudden we leave the friendly lights of Rio de Janeiro, of Copacabana Beach, and start going into these dark back streets. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I've made a mistake here. Now I'm thinking, what passport did I use when I come in? Is my cover good? What did I do? We weren't supposed to move. This is not a good thing. We can't be doing this. But the guy, the whole time is looking at me in the rearview mirror, and he just keeps looking at me and making me nervous. And he stops. He gets out, comes back to the car, and out from nowhere comes this beautiful Brazilian girl and sits in the front seat. Foreman moves to the back seat, and she just turns around and just does one of these, just looking at me like what's going on here? So the car takes off we go. They're speaking in Portuguese. I'm trying to figure out what this is all about. And I'm asking him, George, what's going on here? I thought we were going to, go back. He goes, no, I just got to stop one more place. So he goes and he stops. The girl gets out, runs into the place and comes back out, gets back in the car, turns around to the back seat and is just staring at me. He's looking at me through a rearview mirror. Even the informant is like, what's going on? And I'm thinking, all right, what's happening here? And all of a sudden, I see this guy right here next to me with the face that I can only explain as death. He's apparently was George's brujero, witch doctor, I guess, the translation, and telling him, and I guess George wanted him to check me out before he started talking to me to see if I was good. But this guy stared at me for what appeared to be a lifetime. And I felt like he was looking through my soul. Like I'm thinking, man, what is his eyes? There was nothing there. And I'm getting nervous. I'm just repeating it myself. My name is Alejandro Alvarez. I own a warehouse in Miami, trying to convince myself in case he's reading my thoughts. I don't know what he was doing. So anyways, he goes back to George, to the front window, talks to him in Portuguese, and off he walks. And they are just, George looking at me through the mirror, she's looking at me through the thing, and we take off. And not a word is spoken in the car. It's the weirdest, awkwardest thing. I'm thinking, all right, I'm getting ready. I'm going to fight right now with whatever happens. I'm going to bite. I'm going to scratch. I'm going to do anything I need to, but I'm going to get out of this alive. Even if this informant is, is in on it, because that's what I really thought, that he might have told him something, and they were preparing me for something. But no, pretty soon, we start seeing the lights again of Rio, and sure enough, he takes us to this club that's incredible. It's just like a nightmare, like not a nightmare, but like this, people, just dancers all over the place, all kinds of stuff happening, and not a word is spoken about this. And then we're drinking all night. At one point, I get up to go to the bathroom to figure out, to try to get my thoughts and what's going on. And he comes in with some Coke. Hey, you want to do some Coke? No. I can't. If I do, it messes me up and all that. So he's like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that was my man. He says you're good to go. Like saying his brujero gave me the green light, right? His witch doctor said I'm good to go. And the rest of that night, we spoke nothing about business. We just drank. And somehow Miles found me. My partner figured out where I would be, and he found me. And there he was, acting as the surveillance guy there, the only guy, because everybody else had gotten upset and left. But Miles found me. Miles stuck with me. And anyways, through the whole night, I had to pretend I was drunk to get back, that kind of thing. And the next day, we got a chewing out, a major chew out from our DEA attaché. And he wanted to kick us out. He was like, you guys are on the next plane out of here. And he's giving us the riot act, and then knock on the door. Brazilian federal police come in and say, hey, they come in with some transcript, right, showing, a phone call between the witch doctor and someone else talking about, hey, there's a guy in town, we can trust him, we can use him. They even gave me a code name. I can't remember what the code name was, but they gave me a code name saying this guy here, whatever, he's going to be good to go. And so the Brazilian federal police said, he can't leave Brazil. We got to keep him here because, and DEA attaché was not too happy about that. But it turned out to be a great case, Mike. We ended up getting into the negotiations. I left and we came back to Brazil a second time to really, finalize all the details, how we were going to do it. He was going to put a shipment of, I believe it was shoes, and he'd ship it to us. We'd return it back and forth. And we'd do all these things, set up letters of credit. It was a really elaborate scheme, but it was going to be 1,000 kilos. And somehow we got into a conversation. And because, we had someone who had a travel agency, we convinced them that we needed to do one more meeting somewhere else in Spain, I think it was. And he was going to travel from Brazil to Spain, but he didn't realize he was going to have a stop on the way, and that stop was going to be Fort Lauderdale Airport or wherever it was, and we arrested him.
What happened was Alex was able to convince him to take an in-transit flight from Rio to Miami. In the in-transit lounge, they would just switch planes. He would never go through customs, and they would both then board the plane to Spain together. And that's how good Alex was. The guy flew up, listened to him, and then he knows he's a fugitive. And Alex convinced him to do the in-transit flight. As soon as it lands, we pulled him out of the in-transit lounge and told him he was under arrest for the fugitive warrant. We didn't even have to go through the rest of the deal, but we lured him up on the in-transit, and the warrant that was outstanding out of Baltimore is what got him. But the minute we sat him down, Alex wasn't anywhere to be found. I was with my DEA partner, and he spoke Spanish, Portuguese, and English. And he gave up Alex. We told him, okay, it's a game of tag, you're it. And the first guy he gave up was
he gave him my business card.
I gave him the business card. This is why I was coming up to do a deal with Alex. I said, okay, thank you. We'll go after him later.
I thought we had a trust established, but no.
Yes, it was.
It didn't work. But it didn't work out.
Yeah, it was like that. It was getting pretty sophisticated. That he's in Rio de Janeiro doing a dope deal under the auspices of an import-exporter.
Yeah. The thing I wanted to ask you, I guess, because, wow, there are so many different twists and turns with this case and so many highlights from this program. So we could put a bow on it with this question before we say goodbye. And it's been a heck of a conversation. The hour and a half has flown by. It doesn't even feel like it's been that long. Is naturally when you're in it, you don't really have time to look back and reflect on it, because afterwards there comes the procedural aspect following the legal and then other investigations that follow after this one. But being retired now and having as much experience as you guys have had in the field across the years, when you look back at this case now, some almost 35 years later, knowing what you know now, how do you reflect on it? And Miles, we'll start with you.
Well, for me, being that I'm still in law enforcement at the state level, I look back and I marvel as to what we were able to accomplish, because since then, the restrictions on certain types of investigation have become very, very restrictive, like, just real dope to sham, not allowing money to walk. The things that we were able to accomplish back then because of this certified undercover operation truly made what we did exceptional. I look back, I had, the best partner in the world. I had a guy who can be an undercover one day and could be a business owner the next day and could be a customs agent the third day. And our life and our investigative skills just work synergistically to the point where we were just a great match. And that we realized there was no egos involved, that DEA, FBI, Miami-Dade, narcotics, everybody wanted to work with us. It was something that I don't believe can ever be replicated. And I'm in the world today, and I look at operations. There's no more undercover operations certified what we had. Everything is more short-term. You try to convince somebody, it's very, very difficult. The things that we did, I just don't believe are occurring any longer. Again, I have my son who's in the business, and I know what he does. My daughter's in the business, I know what she does, and nothing comes close to what we did, 30 plus years ago. And it was like the stars were aligned. We had, great undercover, great, great minds coming together and making this all happen. And on top of all that was our management. And I got to praise our supervisor at the time who allowed this to occur. And to this day, Alex retiring as the attaché of Spain, and before that was the assistant special agent in charge of Miami. His leadership skills as a manager, basically, in my opinion, stem from what he learned from the managers that we had 35 years ago. And I always say to Alex, our managers never managed by no, they always managed by yes. And Alex lived that motto. And as a manager, he always figured out a way, because he was that street agent and he knew what his guys needed, and he always was there to help them. So that's the legacy that we put forth.
Thank you, Miles. Yeah, Mike, the same here. I look back at that and I think, wow, it took a toll, family wise. There was no way around it. On both of us, right? We were just out there doing it. And sometimes it's because, the case is just, you had to do it. Other times because we really loved it. And I really loved what I did. I enjoyed it. I thought we were really doing good, and it was a great opportunity. I look back now and I think, wow, how were we able to do this? I don't know if in this day I would have that same energy or that same risk taking that we were doing, because I'll be honest with you. I think it's the youth and the way you think at that time. But I reflect that was one of the best times of my career. I owe a lot to that. And Miles, I always appreciate you having my back, always, in every aspect, in everything we did. So I really appreciate you. Miles is like my brother. We also have a mutual friend who's like our brother, who actually turned us onto this podcast, Mike. It's Bob Starkman.
Yep.
The author of Inside Both Courts. And he's organized something that's pretty cool. He's organized something called he calls it the Organized Coffee Club Boys, right? Have you heard about that?
Yep, I have a mug. I have a shirt actually from them too.
And I have to tell you, it's done wonders for, he's got a group of incredible NYPD retired detectives, that the stories they tell and the things they talk about. But it's a venue where you can, vent and release. And some of the stories we start to tell, and I think back and reflect on these cases that we were doing, and it was amazing how we did it. And like Miles said, the perfect storm of prosecutors on board with us, upper management supporting us, other agencies, the best of the other agencies, and working together. It was just the perfect storm of operation. I was proud to be a part of it. and I can tell you that it's made me think and made me choose different career paths along the way. But always, no matter what I've done, this operation to me will stand out as one of the best things I've done in my career.
Me as well. I mean, it was just something that was super special, and to work with your best friends was like never working. It was like every day. So we're getting paid to go out and do what we do, which is absolutely amazing. And again, reiterate this: there was no egos. That was the mainstay of our operation. That we, all of us, could be 10, 15 of us, all of us were just a piece of the puzzle, and everyone had their role, and everyone did it exceptionally well. And that's what made everything operate at that level. And we were blessed. It was the right time, the right period in history, and we were just blessed to be part of that. And again, I could not be more appreciative, and I reflect on this every day and think how amazing. And I feel like we personally accomplished some good things. We did arrest bad guys. We did get drugs off the street. It wasn't just just words. We did get bad guys off the street, and we did help society.
Yeah, you sure did. You sure did. And now it's archived in video and both audio form as well. And we are blessed as an audience as well. And I can speak on behalf of producer Victor in the back, doing a great job as he always does, that you guys wanted to share this here because, again, this is 3 decades worth of you guys doing different operations across the board and against different dealers, different objectives. But I love how, and I could see in how you guys described it, how special this case is for you. And that's how you described it, Alex. It's special. So to view this as a hallmark, given how much both of you have done, I think it says a lot. And I'm honored that you chose this podcast as the one to revisit it with. So I can't thank you guys enough. Thank you very, very much.
Mike, thank you. And thank your audience for the patience and for the opportunity, man. You'll always, you have a great platform, and we always enjoy hearing your stories. And thank you for letting us tell ours.
But if I may, his last year as the attaché in Spain, he was drawn out of quote undercover retirement, where the Spanish officials needed Alex because Alex had such a great relationship with the Spaniards. They adored him because he was, again, that same person from 30 years earlier, and they were working a narcotics gun running case. And in Spain, undercover basically is like agent provocateur under their law, but foreign officials, it's not illegal. And they asked him if he would come out of court at retirement. He, posing as a imam, had his own mosque, and he dressed the part and played the part. And he was like, a Cuban Spaniard imam, and convinced the bad guys, and to ship their guns into Europe via Spain. And Alex that was his last hurrah as an undercover, 30 years later, in doing it for the Spaniards.
From Alejandro Alvarez to Alejandro Al-Shabazz, just like that.
There you go, Mike. That's the next podcast. That's
right. I'm about to say, we might have to bring you back for part 3, just on that case alone, and what a last hurrah that was.
You're gonna have to get some jackets, right? Make up. I'm a first timer. I'm a second timer. A fifth timer.
Right.
That's a good idea. We do have merch. Repeat offenders, we can call it. So there you go. So this marks the second time that you guys have been on, and what a second time it was. Before I say goodbye to the audience, stick around, guys. We'll all talk off there. Any shout outs to anyone or anything you guys want to get before we go?
Well,
again, I just want to, number one and foremost is, Bob Starkman, who's like our third wheel. He's, he's the guy that introduced us to you. He's the guy that got me transferred from LA to Miami. He's the guy that got me and Alex into an investigative group. He's the guy that, he stirs the pot. He's the one that, when he got things done, he's the one that introduced us to all our individuals when we first got here. So again, a shout out to him. And I just lastly, again, I just want to repeat, to John Logis, his father, Memorial Day, thank you, John. And my son-in-law, Mike Carter, who have both been promoted to Sergeant Major, go to school together. So I'm proud of both of those gentlemen. And we are, we're in a blessed world. I couldn't say it any better. We are blessed. We are blessed. And I thank you for allowing us to tell our story.
No problem. It's an honor and it's a privilege. Producer Vick brought up, and this is why he's such a great producer, the super chat question from earlier from my buddy Tom Sofone. I almost forgot, Tom, and I'm sorry about that. And he wants to know, what would it take nowadays to sign up for CBP, and what's the process like?
So now usually there's a website. Is it usajobs.gov? Usually that's where they're announcing these positions for Customs and Border Protection. And again, Customs and Border Protection still continues to be the sort of like the uniformed division, even though they've branched out into different aspects and they have quite a bit of authority and functions. Very interesting. But they are sort of still the uniformed division of the investigation of under the Customs and Border Protection. So it would just be getting onto that website, getting yourself on, and then looking for the qualifications. Usually they always were requiring a 4-year degree and then some sort of background. But I don't want to tell you something that's not accurate. So the best thing to do is get on that website and start, and scroll. And if he wants more detailed information, we can always find out. Just give him our contact number, Mike, and we'll be more than happy to put him in the right, direction.
And lastly, cbp.gov.
Oh yeah.
Is the agency's own internal website, and it talks about everything he or she would want to know on how to apply.
There you go. Thank you for that super chat earlier, Tom. And go ahead, Alex.
I just got one more last thing. I got recently some things changed in my life. I've gone, and I'm very pleased and happy about those things. And there's a special person listening in the audience that I want to give a shout out to, and just to let you know that very special in my heart.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No problem. Thank you very much for that shout out. And thanks to everybody that tuned in tonight. We always appreciate your support, whether you listened to this, rather you watched it on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitter. We certainly are glad that you guys tuned in. For those of you that listen to this later, thanks to John Costello and my buddy Drew for contributing in the super chat tonight. Can't forget about you guys either. For those of you that will watch and listen to this later on, thank you in advance. Coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast, another volume of The Beat is coming up on Wednesday. He was a captain, police captain, that is, out in California, does a lot of consulting now in retirement, and that will be Captain William Frass for volume 13 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. So be on the lookout for that. And next Friday, fireman in Connecticut, now down in the Bureau of Fire Prevention for the FDNY, and has been there for quite some time, since the 90s, really helped start out the FDNY Training Academy as well, which has become world-renowned. And that's going to be Ron Canterman for another volume of the Best of the Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. So we continue before we take a little summer break. We got a month's worth of shows to do, and they're lining up to be bangers, much like tonight was. So in the meantime, folks, actually, of course, we're trying to introduce the outro songs for those of you that listen on the audio side. You get them. And with that said, I can't think of a better song for those of you tuning in on Spotify and Apple for tonight's episode. He was in the Eagles, but this was released during his solo career, and it was in an episode of Miami Vice. The late, great Glenn Fry, Smuggler's Blues, fittingly.
There you go.
Yeah,
That's our song.
And what a song for this case, and like I said, this episode. So enjoy that, the late, great Glenn Fry, off his 1984 album, No Fun Allowed, Smuggler's Blues, which again was featured in Miami Vice. In the meantime, on behalf of producer Vick and retired special agents Alex, Alonso, and Miles' Sonn, I'm Mike Colón. We'll see you next time. And of course, as the spring continues and both keep playing, go Knicks and go Rangers. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.